It's Halloween. That means it's time to talk some spooky stuff. When thinking of horror games and the countless titles I've played over the years, my mind inevitably goes to some older franchises that are either just not available anymore, as they were part of a given console generation and never seen again, or just not very compatible with modern PCs, making them just as unplayable. But with the current trend of remasters and remakes, particularly in the horror genre, with Capcom pushing out one Resident Evil remake after another, Dead Space coming back with a vengeance, and the upcoming Alone in the Dark, a remake of the grandfather of the survival horror genre, the time is right for a lot of these classics to make a comeback. There are many horror games that could use a refresh or be rebuilt from the ground up, but the following are my picks for horror games that deserve a remaster or even a full remake. Legacy of Kane. The Legacy of Kane series has one of the greatest stories in video game history, and some of the best voice acting as well. The series started in the 90s with Blood Omen Legacy of Kane by Silicon Knights, but it truly hit stardom with Legacy of Kane Soul Reaver by Crystal Dynamics and its many sequels and spin-offs. Unfortunately, after the release of Legacy of Kane Defiance, the series went dormant, leaving the tale in something of a cliffhanger. And while Blood Omen still runs perfectly well on modern PCs, and its 2D nature makes it age much better than the rest, the series is in dire need of a touch-up to bring these titles to modern audiences. Not to mention that different teams handling certain entries in the Legacy of Kane series meant some inconsistencies being part of the overall mythos. Looking at you, Blood Omen 2. This meant that the last game in the series, Defiance, had to fill in the gaps, but cut content meant that it never did. So a remake or a remaster restoring these cut sections, maybe even tidying up the overall plot, would do wonders for the story as a whole. But the remakes have to be like the Resident Evil GameCube remake or the Dead Space remake. They have to keep all the good stuff and expand. Maybe even combine Soul Reaver and Soul Reaver 2, since the first title ends with a big to be continued that led to the sequel. Nightmare Creatures. A classic from the PS1 era, and for those of us with PCs at the time, shareware demos on magazines. Nightmare Creatures is Double Dragon meets Gothic horror, set in Victorian England and following a couple of characters as they battle their way through London pursuing a madman bent on bringing the nation to its knees with an army of grotesque monsters. Nightmare Creatures is a brutal game, with a difficulty in combat and platforming that rivals even the hardest of the Souls-like games. And that is exactly the genre I would use to bring this series back. If we're never gonna get another Bloodborne, let's at least get a good Souls-like Nightmare Creatures instead. And this is coming from someone with a severe case of Souls-like fatigue. But if it means Nightmare Creatures comes back, I'll take it. And as I said, the original game is already harder than most Souls-likes. Clive Barker's Undying. One of the scariest first-person horror games I've ever played, written by Clive Barker himself, the man behind Hellraiser, Nightbreed, and the story that serves as inspiration for Candyman. Undying puts you in the shoes of World War I veteran Patrick Galloway, who returns home to Ireland to the Covenant estate, home to his old friend Jeremiah, to help deal with the supernatural events taking place in the manor, relating to the family inheritance and Jeremiah's siblings, his very dead siblings, who continue to roam the estate to torment him, from a werewolf younger sister to a disembodied ghost older brother and everything in between. Undying is not just terrifying, but a great first-person shooter, combining melee and ranged weapons and even spells. Patrick also has a stone with him, critical to the plot, which increases his magical ability and lets him see things hidden to the naked eye, the source for many of the pan-soiling scenes and imagery. Best of all, if you abuse the stone, a cursed beast trapped inside comes out to pursue you. But the greatest strength Undying has, and which is why I think it should be brought back, is that it blends its horror and action incredibly well. Unlike many other first-person shooter horror games, where the shooting and the scary parts are separate from one another. So imagine this game with the visuals of Resident Evil Village, but the scare factor retained. it would be amazing. Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem. A cult classic if there's ever been one. Eternal Darkness is a GameCube title born of a collaboration between Nintendo and Silicon Knight, in an era where Nintendo wanted to have more mature titles, and so picked the developers of Blood Omen Legacy of Kane to partner with. The game follows Alex Roivas, who's come to her grandfather's home after his murder to look for clues herself since the police don't seem to be doing all that much. She finds the Tome of Eternal Darkness, a book bound in human skin, and which tells the story of a battle between humanity and eldritch gods, starting with a Roman centurion who becomes corrupted, and the many heroes across time, some in Alex's own family line, who faced the darkness. Eternal Darkness is a third-person horror game with an amazing story and great characters, fun combat with weapons and spells, and the ability to target specific body parts, but also great replayability as the choice of enemy eldritch deity changes what enemies do. But its claim to fame has to be the sanity effects. As your sanity dwindles, you'll experience hallucinations that include not just your character falling apart or losing their head, the floor becoming quicksand, but also your TV shutting off, or the channel changing, or the game resetting. They're all temporary, but at the time caused more than a few people to doubt what they saw, and that's something no other game with a sanity mechanic has been able to accomplish. Night Dive Studios have shown interest in remastering the title, but Nintendo has not given the go-ahead. I wonder what would happen if a remaster or remake got the Operation Rainfall treatment, a movement to bring this game back. Just as Operation Rainfall managed to get Japan and EU-only Wii games released in the US. Personally, I think this game could do with a remake. Visuals aside, the combat could do with refinement, and the hallucinations need to be brought up to the modern era. The time of CRT TVs is long gone, so those hallucinations won't have the same bite they once did. Kuan. From Software is widely known these days for the Souls games, but once upon a time they released a survival horror steeped in Japanese folklore and mythology called Kuan for the PlayStation 2. It's a weird game with a creepy as hell atmosphere, great puzzles, and a gruesome story. Told in 3 chapters with different protagonists, their stories intertwined. This title is From Software's own little cult classic, though even at the time of release it was a bit rough, so it could do with a modern design to help tell its story. From Software recently brought back Armored Core, so if they're in the process of bringing back old franchises, maybe this has to be the next stop. Fully remake Kuan. Even though they focused on action games for a while, From Software knows how to do horror well. Bloodborne is the best example, so bring back Kuan. Give it the same treatment Capcom gave Resident Evil 2 or Moda Studios gave Dead Space. Enhance the original, expand on it. Make the gameplay loop more satisfying as well. Armored Core 6 proved that From Software is versatile enough to branch out from the genre and style that became their mainstay and still deliver amazing experiences, so they have what it takes to deliver the ultimate Kuan. Parasite Eve. There must be a few dozen videos out there on the internet clamoring for remakes of the Parasite Eve series. And I, like most out there, do not acknowledge the third birthday as a true Parasite Eve entry. That's a spin-off, and not even a good one at that. But the first Parasite Eve is phenomenal. A great blend of survival horror and RPG mechanics. In fact, if you look at it in a certain way, the gameplay can be considered a primitive version of the current style Square Enix is using for the Final Fantasy VII Remake, with Parasite Eve 2 even closer in design. And that's exactly the technology and design style they should use if they pursue a remake. Granted, the big issue is that remakes are difficult, since the franchise is very much co-owned by Square Enix and Hideaki Sena, the writer of the Parasite Eve novel that serves as inspiration for the series, and as far as I know, while he liked how the first Parasite Eve turned out, he wasn't a fan of the second one. So if remakes are not possible, and let's say remasters aren't feasible either, then they should just re-release the games to run on the PlayStation 5. They already did something similar with the PlayStation Network back in the PlayStation 3 days, so it wouldn't be much of an issue and it would sell like crazy. Fatal Frame 1 to 3. I made a little video on how to get into the Fatal Frame series, so if you don't know anything about this franchise, then hey, go ahead and take a look at that video first, or go check it out right after this one. If Resident Evil and Silent Hill hold the top positions in the survival horror championships, then Fatal Frame is the third major contestant. Fatal Frame games have you fighting ghosts in incredibly haunted and cursed locales with nothing but a handy little camera called the Camera Obscura, which has the power to exorcise spirits and reveal what's hidden. The stories in the games have elements of folklore and religion, firmly rooted in Japanese culture and with an oppressive, eerie atmosphere that rivals anything the other two franchises I mentioned could ever do. Fatal Frame games are scary as hell, at least for me, and at the very least unnerving. The ghosts are creepy, their stories are scary, and the events that led to the curses you're fighting are just gruesome. In recent years, both Fatal Frame 5, once a Wii U exclusive, and Fatal Frame 4, a Japan-only Wii exclusive, got remastered releases on all platforms. So let's finish the job and do an HD collection of the original 3 games. And if we go the remake route, then the first game desperately needs it, to add some of the quality of life improvements of later entries. Fatal Frame 2 had a Wii remake released after Fatal Frame 4, so it just needs the remaster treatment. Fatal Frame 3 sits somewhere in the middle, and a remake would serve it well to polish some of the uneven elements the game has, such as the forced stealth sections and some really annoying encounters. A lot of these games are old, so old that even if they're not remade or remastered, they deserve to be brought back into the general public's attention and to video game discourse as a whole. Conservation in video games is so difficult, as older titles are just forgotten, removed from stores to never see the light of day again. These games deserve more opportunities to stand in the spotlight. They're horror classics, some even are masterpieces of the genre, and we should bring them back. But let me know what you think in the comments. Are there other series you think should get the remake or remaster treatment? If you liked this video, please consider hitting the like button, maybe subscribe. It helps more than you know. And I will see you on the next one.